On March the 17th, 1943, at Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard, a crisis was brewing. Lieutenant Commander James Richardson faced a major problem. The USS Wahoo, SS-238, a deadly submarine, had returned from patrol with a 3-foot gash in its pressure hull, courtesy of a Japanese depth charge. The damage assessment was brutal, predicting a minimum of 12 days for repair. This timeline required pumping her dry, moving her into dry dock, cutting out the damage, welding, repressurizing, and testing. Captain Dudley Mushmorton's voice was cold. 12 days meant 12 days. The Wahoo wasn't sinking Japanese ships, forcing someone else to take his patrol area. The math for the entire Pacific Fleet was terrifying. With only 47 submarines to cover 64 million square miles, every submarine in dry dock meant one less hunter. U.S. submarines were sustaining dry dock requiring damage at a rate of 3.2 boats per week. With only 3 operational dry docks at Pearl Harbor and an average repair time of 8 to 14 days, the submarine force was on a path to grinding to a halt within 6 months. What no one knew on that March morning was that a 34-year-old Navy diver named Robert Payne was about to propose something that experts would dismiss as suicidal. His plan violated Navy regulations, required equipment that didn't officially exist, and demanded depths Navy divers weren't certified for. Yet, if it worked, it would repair Wahoo in 10 hours instead of 10 days, changing submarine warfare forever. The universal belief and manual dictate was simple. Submarines can't be repaired underwater. The Mark V diving suit, weighing 200 pounds, allowed work up to 180 feet, but at those depths, the human body was a ticking time bomb. Nitrogen narcosis set in around 100 feet, causing divers to feel drunk, make stupid decisions, and even hallucinate at 150 feet. Regulations limited work at 180 feet to just 15 minutes of bottom time for light tasks like inspection. Welding was deemed impossible. The Navy's Bureau of Ships had tested underwater welding in 1941, concluding that at depths exceeding 60 feet, it produced structurally unsound welds with a 73% failure rate. The official translation, "Don't even think about it." This meant dry dock was the only option, a process that took a minimum of 8 days, usually closer to 14. The backlog was reaching crisis levels, with USS Drum, USS Trigger, and USS Plunger waiting for repairs. Captain Charles Lockwood, Commander Submarine Force Pacific, learned the Wahoo couldn't enter dry dock for 9 days, meaning 3 weeks total out of action. Japanese convoy activity was increasing near the Wahoo's patrol area, leaving a critical sector unwatched. Lockwood picked up the phone. "Find me whoever runs the diving team. We need to figure out if there's any way at all to speed this up." 3 hours later, Robert Payne walked into Richardson's office and said, "I can weld it in place, sir." Richardson was aghast, reminding him of the 73% failure rate. Payne interrupted. "The report is wrong." Payne, a ship's fitter turned diver, had 12 years of diving experience and an obsessive streak. He questioned procedures. During the Pearl Harbor salvage after December 7, 1941, Payne dove on the sunken USS California. Ignoring protocol, he thought, "Why can't we weld this shut from outside?" His supervisor said it was impossible, but Payne did it anyway. On February 3, 1942, without authorization, he descended to 45 feet, carrying a modified electrode, and welded a patch over a torpedo hole. 90 minutes later, he surfaced, and the patch held. Engineers later found the weld was stronger than the surrounding hull plate. His supervisor wanted a court-martial, but Captain Homer Wallen promoted him, telling him, "Now figure out how to do it deeper." Payne spent the next year experimenting, finding the problem wasn't that underwater welding failed, but that Navy divers used the wrong technique. They tried to weld on land with long continuous beads. Payne discovered the correct technique required short bursts, intermittent welds, letting each section cool to prevent hydrogen embrittlement. His modified technique achieved an 80% success rate at 120 feet, the depth of Wahoo's damage. When Richardson brought up the fact that the Bureau of Ships would never approve it, Payne suggested, "Then we don't ask, Bureau of Ships, sir." On March 19, 1943, at 0300 hours, Payne and a three-man crew loaded equipment onto a barge in the dark. Richardson had authorized the off-the-books operation with no formal work order. If it failed, Richardson would be court-martialed, and Payne would be disgraced. Payne focused on the numbers. Wahoo had sunk 15 Japanese ships, totaling 60,000 tons. Cutting repair time from 12 days to 10 hours would put Wahoo back in the fight 11 days earlier, which was the operational equivalent of adding 23 submarines to the Pacific Fleet. Commander Morton was waiting on deck. "Payne," he said quietly, "if you get yourself killed doing this, I'm going to be extremely disappointed." At 0430 hours, Payne entered the murky 95-foot water, reaching the damage. At that depth, nitrogen was flooding his bloodstream. He had 15 minutes of bottom time. He guided the prefabricated patch over the 3-foot gash and struck the arc. 5,000 degrees. He welded by feel through the steam and bubbles. At 1100 hours, Admiral Lockwood's office was packed with staff, including a very angry Bureau of Ships representative, Commander Paul Hammond. Hammond learned that Richardson authorized an unauthorized repair, which was now complete. Richardson reported that the weld held with zero leakage after being pressure tested to 150 psi. Hammond exploded, citing regulation violations and risking a $1 million submarine, based on untested theories. Lockwood let the argument rage, then silenced the room. He pointed to the map, reminding Hammond he needed 120 submarines to effectively blockade Japan, but only had 43. "Every day a submarine spends in dry dock is a day Japanese tankers deliver fuel," Lockwood stated. He told Hammond, "You see paperwork and regulations. I see men dying." Lockwood's order was that Payne would train every diver at Pearl Harbor, and Hammond would take the documented procedure back to Washington, explaining to Admiral King why they were refusing a method that tripled submarine availability. On March 22, 1943, just 3 days after its repair, the USS Wahoo slipped out of Pearl Harbor. The weld held through a test dive to 180 feet. Post-war analysis would show Payne's underwater welds were 12% stronger than conventional dry dock welds. On March 29th, Wahoo intercepted a Japanese convoy and sank a 5,000-ton cargo ship. The data was clear. Before Payne's technique, average repair time was 11.3 days, with 72% of the submarine force operational. Afterward, repair time dropped to 2.4 days, and the operational rate jumped to 91%. By eliminating the dry dock bottleneck, Payne's technique effectively added the equivalent of 17 submarines to the Pacific Fleet. The technique became the new standard operating procedure. A cracked hull plate on the USS Harder off Formosa, which previously would have meant 2 weeks in dry dock, was repaired by a Payne-trained diver in 6 hours at a forward base. The Japanese, seeing their anti-submarine forces report successful attacks, yet finding submarine attacks didn't decrease, were baffled. Vice Admiral Teo Kurita suspected they were not sinking American submarines, but merely inconveniencing them. Between April 1943 and August 1945, U.S. submarines sustained significant battle damage 412 times. Using Payne's method, 347 of those repairs were completed in forward areas, with an average repair time of 18 hours. This meant submarines returned to patrol within 3 days instead of 3 weeks. The effect was devastating. Japanese merchant fleet tonnage sank from 6.4 million tons in January 1943 to 1.5 million tons by August 1945, starving the Japanese war machine. Robert Payne never received formal recognition or a medal. He refused to patent the technique, saying, "It belongs to every diver who uses it. You can't patent something men's lives depend on." The Navy documented it as the standard underwater hull repair technique, still taught today. Total underwater repairs using Payne's technique from 1943 to 1945, 1,247. Estimated dry dock time saved, 10,053 days. Additional Japanese ships sunk, 734. Estimated American lives saved by starving the Japanese war machine, 18,000 plus. Robert Payne retired in 1948 and spent the next 30 years fishing in Mississippi, telling neighbors he fixed boats during the war. His obituary in 1981 was 3 sentences long, but at his funeral, 17 men showed up wearing submarine combat patrol pins. They were former submariners from boats he had repaired, who had read patrol reports mentioning emergency underwater repairs. One of them spoke, "We came home because submarines kept hunting. Submarines kept hunting because someone figured out how to repair them in hours instead of weeks. This man did that." Today, every major commercial shipyard and navy in the world relies on underwater welding for maintenance, using Payne's method. Engineers estimate underwater welding prevents $11.2 billion annually in dry dock delays. In 1943, it prevented the Pacific Submarine Force from becoming a logistics bottleneck. It started with one diver who saw an impossible problem and said, "That's solvable." Chief Petty Officer Robert Joseph Payne, U.S. Navy diver, a pioneer of emergency underwater welding, saved a war.